Welcome to our deep dive into North Korea, specifically the Kim dynasty, the only family to have ever ruled the country.
Wow.
We've got a really interesting mix of sources for you today.
Okay.
A National Geographic documentary,
Right.
some historical accounts, and even a reference from a 1950s cartoon.
Wow. That's quite a range.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild ride as we uncover how this family rose to power and explore their complex relationship with the U.S.
You know, it's truly remarkable how a single family has managed to maintain such an iron grip
Right.
over an entire nation for so long.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
really makes you question how such a system could even be possible.
Right. It's like something out of a history book, but it's happening right now.
Exactly.
To really understand it, we need to go back to the beginning.
Okay.
Before we had North Korea as we know it, the Korean peninsula was a single country occupied by Japan.
Right.
And that's where our story starts, with a young man named Kim Il-sung fighting as a guerrilla against the Japanese.
This period was absolutely crucial in shaping Kim Il-sung's image and his path to power.
Okay.
Think about it. Korea is occupied by a foreign power, and here's this young man
Yeah.
risking his life for his people.
Right.
It created this powerful narrative of a wounded hero, a David fighting against the Goliath of Japanese imperialism.
It's like a classic underdog story.
Yes.
And those always resonate with people.
Exactly. And this image of Kim Il-sung as a fighter, as someone who endured hardship for the sake of Korea, became a cornerstone of his later propaganda.
Wow.
It set the stage for him to be seen as a savior, a leader who would guide his people to a brighter future.
So World War II ends, Japan is defeated, and Korea unfortunately gets divided.
Right.
That's when Stalin steps in and chooses Kim Il-sung to lead North Korea.
Yes.
Was he an obvious choice?
Not necessarily. There were other prominent Korean communists at the time, some with even stronger ties to Moscow.
Okay.
But Stalin saw something in Kim Il-sung, perhaps his charisma, his ability to connect with the people, or maybe his ruthlessness. Whatever the reason, Stalin's backing proved crucial in consolidating Kim Il-sung's power.
But even with Stalin's support, things weren't exactly smooth sailing at the start, right?
No, there was definitely some uncertainty among the North Korean people.
Right.
Kim Il-sung was still relatively unknown to many.
Sure.
And there were other factions vying for control.
Okay.
But then came the Korean War in 1950, and everything changed.
This is where his wounded hero image really comes into play, right?
Absolutely.
Mm.
Kim Il-sung, emboldened by promises of support from Stalin and Mao Zedong, decides to invade South Korea.
Wow.
With the aim of reunifying the peninsula under communist rule.
Okay.
It was a gamble that ultimately backfired, leading to immense devastation.
Right.
And over 1 million North Korean deaths.
The war was a disaster for everyone involved.
Yes.
But especially for North Korea. It's hard to imagine how Kim Il-sung could recover from such a failure.
But that's what makes this period so fascinating.
Okay.
Instead of being ousted, he used the war to further solidify his control. He blamed the devastation on the U.S. and its allies, portraying himself as the protector of the Korean people against foreign aggression.
So even in defeat, he was able to spin the narrative to his advantage.
Exactly, and he backed up this narrative by establishing a system of control that was truly Orwellian.
Okay.
He introduced the songbun system, which essentially categorized every citizen based on their perceived loyalty to the regime.
So how did this songbun system actually work? It sounds pretty intense.
Imagine your entire life being determined by your family's history and your perceived political reliability.
Yeah.
People were classified into 3 main groups: the core, the wavering, and the hostile.
Wow.
Your songbun determined where you could live, what jobs you could have, even who you could marry. Man. It was a way to ensure absolute loyalty and to weed out any potential dissent.
And those classified as hostile, what happened to them?
Many were sent to labor camps known as gulags,
Right.
where they faced horrific conditions. The gulags became a symbol of the regime's brutality, a chilling reminder of what happened to those who dared to question Kim Il-sung's authority.
It's mind-blowing how he managed to create such a comprehensive system of control.
Yeah.
It sounds like something straight out of a dystopian novel.
This is where we start to see the psychology of a dictator at play.
Mm-hmm.
Paranoia, a complete lack of empathy, and a willingness to use any means necessary to maintain power.
Wow.
These traits, combined with the trauma of the Korean War,
Yeah.
allowed Kim Il-sung to justify his increasingly oppressive rule.
And it's at this point that his son Kim Jong-il really starts to shape his father's image, right?
Yes, Kim Jong-il was a master of propaganda, understanding its power to control and manipulate.
Right.
He built a machine that elevated Kim Il-sung to a godlike status.
Wow.
Someone who not only provided for his people, but was practically worshipped.
I've got pictures from the research you sent over, and it's incredible.
Oh, wow.
Statues, portraits, murals. Kim Il-sung's face is everywhere.
It's not just the visual aspect. They rewrote history, crediting Kim Il-sung with almost superhuman feats during the war against Japan and the Korean War.
Right.
They even created elaborate myths about his birth,
Really?
claiming it was heralded by a double rainbow and a new star in the sky.
Wow, talk about crafting an image.
Right.
And they went even further by suppressing all other religions, right?
Absolutely. Kim Il-sung became the sole object of veneration in North Korea, eclipsing any other faith or belief system.
Wow.
This was key to solidifying his position as the ultimate authority.
Right.
The one and only source of truth and guidance for the North Korean people.
It's almost like he created a new religion with himself at the center.
That's a very apt comparison.
Yeah.
And this control over information, the ability to shape the narrative and control what people believe was central to the Kim dynasty strategy.
And it all played out under the Hermit Kingdom strategy, isolating North Korea from the outside world.
Yes, that isolation was crucial for maintaining their version of reality. They severely restricted travel, censored all forms of media, and created a system where the only information people received was carefully curated by the state.
You only need to look at the stark contrast in development between North and South Korea during this period to see the impact of this isolation.
Yeah.
South Korea, despite its own challenges, was experiencing rapid economic growth and integration with the global community, while North Korea remained trapped in this self-imposed bubble.
It's a tragic comparison that highlights the devastating consequences of the Kim regime's policies. By prioritizing absolute control and ideological purity, they sacrificed the well-being and potential of an entire nation.
It's a powerful reminder of how information, or the lack thereof, can be used to control and manipulate.
Yes.
But Kim Il-sung's control wasn't just internal. He also made a point of provoking the U.S., didn't he?
He did. And it's important to understand that these provocations were often carefully calculated to achieve specific goals, both domestically and internationally. One of the first major incidents was the Blue House raid in 1968.
Okay, what happened there?
Kim Il-sung sent a group of commandos on a mission to assassinate the South Korean president.
Wow.
They almost succeeded infiltrating Seoul and getting within meters of the Blue House, the presidential residence,
Oh my God.
before being discovered.
Wow.
While the raid ultimately failed,
Okay.
it served a key purpose for Kim Il-sung.
It must have created quite a stir back in North Korea.
Absolutely. Imagine the headlines: "Our brave soldiers strike at the heart of the enemy."
Wow.
It solidified his image as a strong leader, willing to take on the South and their American allies.
Right.
He was a propaganda victory, reinforcing the narrative that North Korea was constantly under threat and needed a powerful leader like Kim Il-sung to protect them. And this narrative of being under constant threat was further reinforced just a few months later with the USS Pueblo incident.
Oh, this is the one I was particularly curious about. What was Kim Il-sung thinking in an unarmed U.S. spy ship? What did he hope to gain by capturing it?
It might seem like a reckless move, but there was a calculated logic behind it. Remember, this was 1968, the height of the Cold War, and the U.S. was deeply entangled in the Vietnam War. Kim Il-sung saw an opportunity to exploit this vulnerability and score a major propaganda victory.
So he was using the Pueblo incident to send a message not just to the U.S., but also to his own people in the world.
Exactly. By capturing the Pueblo and its crew, he could demonstrate North Korea's strength and defiance against the supposed American superpower. And the fact that the U.S., preoccupied with Vietnam, chose to apologize and negotiate for the crew's release, rather than retaliate, played right into his hands.
The sources you sent included an account from one of the sailors. I have to say it was a pretty harrowing read.
Oh, yeah.
The injuries, the fear of retaliation, the forced confessions.
It's tough.
It really painted a bleak picture of their captivity.
Those sailors' accounts are crucial to understanding the human cost of Kim Il-sung's brinkmanship. These weren't just pawns in a political game, they were real people. Whose lives were turned upside down by this incident, and it's important to remember that this wasn't just an isolated event. Kim Il-sung repeatedly used these types of provocations to keep the world on edge and reinforce his image as a fearless leader who would stand up to anyone.
It's a strategy that seems to have worked for him, at least in the short term, But didn't he eventually back down during the tree-cutting incident in 1976?
That's right. The tree-cutting incident was a fascinating case study
Okay.
in the dynamics of power and how even the smallest events can escalate into major confrontations.
Right.
It all started with a simple poplar tree in the demilitarized zone that was blocking the view between observation posts.
I remember reading about this. It seemed like such a bizarre thing to spark a crisis.
It might seem trivial, but for Kim Il-sung, it was a matter of principle, a
Yep.
symbolic challenge to his authority. He saw the U.S. attempt to trim the tree
Yeah.
as an act of aggression, a violation of North Korean sovereignty.
So he overreacted, sending soldiers to attack the U.S. troops.
He did, and in the ensuing fight,
Oh, wow.
2 U.S. Army officers were killed.
Oh, my gosh.
This time, however, the U.S. response was swift and dramatic.
Right.
They launched Operation Paul Bunyan, a massive show of force.
Wow.
Designed to intimidate Kim Il-sung and demonstrate their resolve.
I love the name, by the way. It's like they deliberately chose something that sounded larger than life.
Yeah.
Almost comical to emphasize the point.
It's quite ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
This massive military operation involving B-52 bombers and hundreds of heavily armed soldiers, all to chop down a single tree, but it worked.
Wow.
Kim Il-sung, perhaps realizing he had miscalculated, issued a rare apology.
Really?
It was the first time he had ever backed down from a confrontation with the U.S.
So what does that tell us about Kim Il-sung's strategy? Was this a turning point or just a tactical retreat?
It's hard to say for sure, but I think it highlights the limits of his brinkmanship.
Okay.
He was willing to push boundaries and provoke, but only up to a certain point.
Right.
He understood that a full-blown conflict with the U.S. would be disastrous for North Korea.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a delicate balancing act,
For sure.
projecting strength and defiance,
Right.
while also avoiding a catastrophic war. And all of this was happening as his son, Kim Jong-il, was being groomed to take over.
Yes. Kim Jong-il's rise to power was a carefully orchestrated affair.
Oh, absolutely.
He started taking on more responsibilities in the 1970s, and by the 1980s, he was effectively running the country's propaganda machine
Right.
and overseeing key aspects of the military and security apparatus.
He was learning the ropes from a master manipulator.
Absolutely. And while he followed his father's playbook in many ways, Kim Jong-il also brought his own style and priorities to the regime. One of his key focuses was the development of North Korea's nuclear program.
Right.
This was something that Kim Il-sung had been pursuing for a while, right? But it really took off into Kim Jong-il.
That's right. Kim Il-sung saw nuclear weapons as the ultimate deterrent, a way to ensure North Korea's survival in a hostile world. But Kim Jong-il took it a step further, making the pursuit of nuclear weapons a central pillar of his military-first policy.
So even as Kim Il-sung was getting older, the groundwork was being laid for an even more isolated and militaristic North Korea.
Yes, and this transition of power became official in 1994 when Kim Il-sung died.
Right.
Kim Jong-il inherited a country facing immense challenges both internally and externally.
He took over at a really turbulent time. The Cold War was over, the Soviet Union had collapsed, and North Korea was suddenly without its main economic and political backer.
It was a period of profound uncertainty and hardship for North Korea.
Wow.
They were struggling to adapt to a new world order, and their economy was in shambles.
This is when the devastating famine known as the Arduous March hit. Yeah.
Yes, the famine was a horrific event that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives.
That's terrible.
It was a combination of factors,
Right.
economic mismanagement, natural disasters, and the loss of Soviet aid. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of the North Korean system and the human cost of its isolation.
So how did Kim Jong-il handle this crisis? Did he try to open up the country, reform the economy, seek help from the international community?
He did the opposite.
Wow, really?
He doubled down on his military-first policy, diverting even more resources to the military and the nuclear program.
It's hard to believe.
It was a strategy that prioritized regime survival above all else, even the well-being of his own people.
It's a truly baffling paradox. How could he justify such a policy in the face of such widespread suffering?
This is where we see the psychology of dictatorship at play again.
Yeah.
Kim Jong-il, like his father, was driven by paranoia and a deep-seated fear of losing power.
Okay.
He saw the military and nuclear weapons as his ultimate insurance policy,
Right.
his way of guaranteeing the regime's survival against any threat, whether real or imagined.
So the famine, instead of leading to change, actually reinforced the existing power structure and solidified Kim Jong-il's grip on the country.
Tragically, yes, and this policy of prioritizing the military and nuclear weapons over the needs of the people continued to have devastating consequences for North Korea in the years to come.
And what about his relationship with the U.S.? Did he continue his father's strategy of provocation?
He did, but with a different approach. Kim Jong-il's style was more about calculated brinkmanship, using the threat of nuclear weapons, and carefully orchestrated provocations to extract concessions from the international community.
So it's less about outright aggression and more about using their nuclear program as leverage.
Precisely, Kim Jong-il understood that in a post-Cold War world, North Korea's only real bargaining chip was its potential to cause chaos.
Right.
And he wasn't afraid to exploit that. He conducted missile tests, threatened to withdraw from international agreements, and engaged in a constant game of diplomatic push and pull with the U.S. and its allies.
It sounds exhausting. Was he ever actually interested in denuclearization, or was it all just a way to get what he wanted?
That's a question that has been debated for decades.
Yeah.
There were moments when it seemed like real progress was being made, like during the six-party talks in the early 2000s. But ultimately, Kim Jong-il was never willing to give up his nuclear weapons.
Right.
He saw them as essential to his regime's survival and perhaps as a source of personal prestige.
So he played the international community like a fiddle, using their fear of a nuclear North Korea to his advantage.
He was a master at manipulating the anxieties of the world, and this strategy of brinkmanship unfortunately proved quite effective in securing aid and concessions while allowing him to continue developing his nuclear arsenal.
It's a pattern that, from what I've read, continues to this day.
Sadly, yes. Kim Jong-il's death in 2011 brought his youngest son, Kim Jong Un, to power someone who at the time was a complete unknown on the world stage.
The Kim dynasty continued. It's like a real-life Game of Thrones with incredibly high stakes. And it turns out Kim Jong-un was ready to play the game, taking his father and grandfather's playbook and upping the ante.
Yeah.
But before we get into his reign, can we take a step back and look at what makes this dynastic rule possible?
Right.
What allows the Kim family to hold on to power for so long, despite the suffering we've discussed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there's no simple answer. It's a complex web of factors.
Yeah.
The cult of personality built around the Kim family, the relentless propaganda machine, the brutal suppression of any dissent, and a pervasive fear that permeates every aspect of North Korean society.
You mentioned the cult of personality earlier, how Kim Il-sung was elevated to almost godlike status.
Right.
Does that continue with Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un?
Absolutely. It's a core element of the Kim dynasty's legitimacy.
Okay.
They've managed to convince generations of North Koreans that the Kim family is not only divinely ordained to rule,
Wow.
but also that they are the protectors of the nation against a hostile and threatening outside world.
It's like a constant siege mentality, always under threat, always needing a strong leader to defend them. It's hard to imagine living with that kind of fear all the time.
It's a form of psychological control that's incredibly effective.
Yeah.
It creates a sense of dependence on the leader, a belief that without the Kim family, North Korea would be vulnerable and defenseless.
So they control the narrative, they control the information, they instill fear, and they create this image of the Kim family as the only ones who can keep the country safe. It's a pretty effective, albeit terrifying recipe for staying in power.
It's a recipe that, unfortunately, has proven remarkably resilient.
Right.
But that doesn't mean it's invincible. There are cracks in the facade signs that this system is facing increasing pressure.
Okay, what kind of signs are we talking about? Give me some hope here.
Well, one major factor is the state of the North Korean economy.
Okay.
It's been crippled by decades of mismanagement, corruption, and international sanctions. The situation has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which led to border closures and further isolation. There are reports of widespread food shortages and increasing poverty, even among the elite.
So even the core class, the ones closest to the regime, are feeling the pinch.
Yes, and this is a significant development. For years, the regime has managed to maintain the loyalty of the elite
Right.
by providing them with certain privileges and a relatively comfortable lifestyle.
Right.
But as the economic situation deteriorates, those privileges are becoming harder to maintain.
Yeah.
This could potentially lead to dissent and instability within the ruling class itself.
That's fascinating. It sounds like the economic situation could be a real Achilles heel for the regime.
It certainly has the potential to be.
Yeah.
Kim Jong Un has promised economic prosperity and improvement in people's lives.
Okay.
But if he can't deliver on those promises, it could erode his legitimacy.
Right.
Especially among the younger generation who have higher expectations and are more aware of the outside world.
Speaking of the younger generation, how are they different from their parents and grandparents? Is there any indication that their views on the Kim dynasty are changing?
That's a really important question.
Yeah.
While it's hard to gauge public opinion in such a closed society, There are signs that the younger generation is less ideologically indoctrinated and more exposed to information from the outside world.
Yeah.
The availability of smuggled cell phones and access to foreign media, even if limited, is having an impact.
So they're getting glimpses of what life is like beyond the borders of North Korea.
Yeah.
How is that affecting their attitudes?
It's creating a sense of curiosity, a desire for more freedom and opportunities.
Right.
They see the economic prosperity and technological advancements in other countries,
Yeah.
and it makes them question the narrative they've been fed their whole lives.
It's like a crack in the wall, a small but potentially significant breach in the regime's information control.
Exactly. And as this generation comes of age, their desire for change could become a powerful force for reform, or even in the long run, a challenge to the regime itself.
So we've got economic pressure, a younger generation that's more open to the outside world, and then there's Kim Jong Un's health. Didn't we hear rumors about him being ill a while back?
There have been recurring rumors and speculation about his health for several years now.
Yeah.
While it's difficult to verify anything in a regime as secretive as North Korea's,
Right.
it's certainly a factor worth considering.
Because if something were to happen to him with no clear successor in place, it could throw the entire country into chaos.
Absolutely. A sudden power vacuum at the top could trigger a scramble for control,
Yeah.
potentially leading to instability, infighting, and even violence. It's a scenario that the international community has been wargaming for years as the stakes are incredibly high.
And then there's the nuclear program, which Kim Jong Un has aggressively expanded since taking power. He's conducted more missile tests than his father and grandfather combined, and seems determined to develop a nuclear arsenal capable of reaching the U.S. mainland. Where does this leave the U.S. and its allies?
It's a constant challenge. The Biden administration has signaled a willingness to engage in diplomacy with North Korea,
Right.
but they've also made it clear that they won't tolerate North Korea's nuclear ambitions. It's a delicate balancing act, trying to de-escalate tensions while also preventing North Korea from becoming a full-blown nuclear threat.
So it's a high-stakes game of diplomacy with the threat of nuclear war looming in the background. It's pretty intense. What about China? They're North Korea's main ally and economic lifeline, right? What role do they play in all of this?
China's role is crucial. They provide North Korea with economic and diplomatic support.
Right.
And they have a vested interest in stability on the Korean peninsula. They don't want to see a regime collapse or a war break out.
So they're walking a tightrope trying to keep North Korea afloat without condoning their actions or provoking the U.S.
Exactly. And their relationship with North Korea is complex and often fraught with tension.
Okay.
They don't always see eye to eye, especially when it comes to North Korea's nuclear program.
Sounds like predicting the future of North Korea is like trying to read tea leaves. There are so many variables, so many potential outcomes.
It's a constantly evolving situation.
Right.
And it's difficult to make any definitive predictions, but by understanding the historical context, the internal dynamics of the regime, and the complex interplay of external forces, we can at least start to make sense of this incredibly challenging and important issue.
So where does that leave us? We've explored the rise of the Kim dynasty,
Right.
how they've maintained their grip on power,
Yeah.
and the challenges they're facing now. What's the takeaway message for our listener?
I think the key takeaway is that even the most seemingly stable and monolithic regimes can be vulnerable.
Yeah.
The Kim dynasty has survived for over 70 years, but it's facing unprecedented pressures from within, and without the economic situation is precarious. The younger generation is showing signs of restlessness, and the international community is becoming increasingly impatient with North Korea's nuclear ambitions.
So change could be on the horizon, even if we can't predict exactly what form it will take.
That's the fascinating thing about history. It's constantly unfolding.
Right.
And the actions of individuals can have a profound impact on the course of events. Who knows what the next chapter holds for North Korea? Will the Kim dynasty continue its grip on power? Will there be a peaceful transition to a more open and prosperous society? Or will the country descend into chaos and conflict?
It's a question that only time will answer. But one thing is for sure, the world will be watching. And we hope that by providing you with a deeper understanding of this complex issue, you'll be better equipped to engage with it, to form your own opinions, and to contribute to the conversation.
Because the future of North Korea, and indeed the peace and security of the entire region, depends on informed and engaged citizens like you.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us into the world of the Kim dynasty. We encourage you to continue exploring this fascinating and important topic and to consider the questions we've raised today. The answers may not be easy, but the search for them is essential.